Hello, and welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemerovski, and I'm your host. We're going to have a fun show today and pick up on some themes that we've been working on the last few years. First of which is our guest, Jay Shifman from Mainstream Strategy, is a millennial. And as you know, I think the millennials are going to rule the world very shortly. So we always like to look at the world from the perspective of millennials. So we've got that covered today. Also, we've been trying to talk to millennials, and we've done some shows, who have run for office before and get their perspective on why they ran for office and what they learned, etc. So we have someone who's been a candidate. And then we're going to couple that with one of my favorite themes, which is getting you to run for office. And Jay is a political consultant. Now we're going to violate a small rule I have on the show today, and since it's my show, I can violate my own rules. I usually try not to have people who are going to come at it from the Republican part of the spectrum or the Democratic part of the spectrum. And Jay clearly comes at this conversation from the Democratic part of the spectrum. But he's a political consultant, and we have him on the show today because I want you to hear from a political consultant what they do, what you should think about when you run for office. And I would suggest to you it's almost impossible to find someone who is a political consultant only to independents. That is a person who will not be having many meals with their family and probably living on the street. If you want to make money in this business, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, and if you're good, you're making money, which you should do. So we're going to break that tiny, tiny rule today and hopefully have a fun show. So welcome, Jay Shifman.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, full disclosure, you were also the son of my neighbors locally.
Yes.
And I know we're going to have a great show today because you don't want to get in trouble with your mother, right?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And she does as well.
They're great neighbors, by the way. So give them a plug on the show. So as I said in the beginning, you're a millennial, which everyone can see. And you ran for office, though. So
yes.
I told you we have 4 questions we ask everybody who runs for office. And you've volunteered to answer the same 4 questions. So
sure.
What made you decide to run for office? What made you decide to take the plunge?
That's a great question. You know, it really starts with my parents, and you so thankfully gave them
real nice.
a nice shout out.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, okay.
It really does. It really does. I tell this story because I think it's funny, and I grew up in a family that didn't think of politics as a dirty word, and you are seeing that less and less now. So I really appreciated that experience. But in my household, you know, we would have congressmen over for dinner, and you know, the governors and the mayor is a family friend, and I didn't understand that wasn't that was a unique experience until I got older, and I got involved in politics from a very young age.
I should have your folks on the show.
You should.
Yeah.
They are very passionate about the subject. My father more so than my mother, but when I was in high school. There was a campaign in Cincinnati called Article 12, Issue 3. And in Cincinnati, until the early 2000s, it was actually legal to discriminate against gays and lesbians in the city of Cincinnati. There was a weird campaign in the early 90s that confused a lot of voters, and people thought they were voting against it, but they voted, you know, for it, and it was kind of a mess. And in the early 2000s, there was a large community that tried to repeal that issue, and we were successful. I was in high school. My social studies teacher got myself and a couple of my close friends involved in this campaign, and it really ignited that fire in me. And we actually got to see, you know, it's very rare that the first campaign you work on is a win, and I was very lucky that was the case. And then from there, it just kept building. I volunteered for the Kerry campaign very soon after that, which obviously was my first loss. And kept going from there with city council races up until last year, helping out on a commissioner's race. And at that time, I saw an opportunity and just decided that the time was right to run for this office that was, you know, available to me. And it's been great. It was a great experience. It was fun learning what it was like on the other side, and it's definitely had a great impact on my career.
How did you choose the particular office you ran for?
Yeah, so there was, the office is precinct executive, and what that means is when it comes to voter registration, when it comes to making sure that all political issues in campaigns are fairly represented in my neighborhood, that's the role that person plays.
So I come from Chicago, and Chicago means you got to make sure the garbage gets picked up.
Yes,
and everything else that happens is supposed to happen too.
Well, it comes from that sort of idea, but we don't have nearly that amount of responsibilities, which is nice. I think I would be a lot more. But a friend of mine who was also running for this role reached out to me and said, they're looking for someone in your neighborhood. Would you be interested? And I didn't really know much, so I did a little bit of research and found that it wasn't an easy race. There is no easy race for politics, but it was, as far as political races go, it was not nearly as extensive as many are. And so I looked at it and said, this could be a great opportunity. And I'll tell you, there's nothing like voting for yourself. It was one of the coolest days I've ever had, was walking into that booth and being able to, color in the box next to my name. That was that was life-changing.
I like that. Good answer. Okay, and we always ask everybody, what did you learn about running for office at that level, that you want to impart on people? What knowledge did you take from that?
Yeah, even for this role, which is very minor, and it has important responsibilities, but in terms of campaigning and representation, it's a lot easier than the average political office. It still took work, and that was the number one lesson that I took away from this, was that I mailed in I mailed in the form to get on the ballot, and other people I know did the same, and they lost, and that was it. They just did that, and they didn't do any work. I actually talked to people. I went around my neighborhood. I had a good friend who was running for state rep at the same time, and I canvassed with her. I knocked on doors and talked to voters with her and introduced myself as Jay Shifman, running for precinct executive, and listened to them what they wanted from the Democratic Party, because that's what this role is it represents the neighborhood for the Democratic Party. And it helped me get the amount of votes that I got. And I'll say this is the one thing that I can, the one thing that I kind of keep in the back of mind, was I actually got more votes in my neighborhood than Hillary Clinton, which and way more than Donald Trump. I got more votes in the presidential race. So that was pretty cool. And obviously we can go into depth about the presidential race last year if we really wanted to. But the fact is that it really showed that if you do the work, if you talk to voters, they'll respond.
Interesting you say that. Now, I was working on political campaigns long before you were born, and also before the advent of the internet and all this messaging and on and on and on. And I always preach the fact that you have to have that one-on-one contact with the voter. You've got to knock on those doors. You got to, get out there and walk. There's no, in my mind, there's still nothing that takes away from that. So that's a perspective you've gained
100%.
in the 2000s now.
Yes.
Or whatever. Yeah.
And it's interesting. There are a lot of people that think that is no longer the case. You see a lot of money in politics. It's all about the ads. It's all about, nothing replaces knocking on doors. And we're seeing that right now in Cincinnati. We have a very hard-fought mayor's race, and one candidate had a bigger ground game and less money. The other one flipped. And in the primary, the one with the bigger ground game won. And the candidate with more money abandoned his entire strategy and said, you know what, I admit that I need to do something different. Started knocking on doors, and it's done a lot better since. And it really shows that, like you said, there's nothing that replaces talking to the average voter.
So I think that advice in and of itself is great advice. So
Yes.
Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're done with Jay Shifman, the candidate.
Fantastic.
We're going to move on to Jay Shifman, the political consultant.
Sure.
Why political consultant?
So that's a great question. My background, and like I said, I got into politics very early, but on the volunteer side. And my background in terms of vocation was, I was a fundraiser for nonprofits for about 5 years. I grew up, again, in a family that really cared about the community through politics and through nonprofits. And so it was an easy decision to get into the nonprofit world. And if you can fundraise, you can pretty much do anything. And so I did that for about 5 years, and it got to a point where at the end of last year, after the presidential race, I was spending more time on the political work than I was on my day job. And it wasn't fair to the group I was working with. It wasn't fair to myself to continue to deny myself this opportunity that was in front of me. And I met a guy who is now my boss, Tom Nyer, who is a former county commissioner in Cincinnati. He was looking for a new Democrat on staff. He's a Republican, and we are a bipartisan group. And so the last Democrat took a different job, and he needed, the new Dem. And we hit it off, and he said, look, I would love to have you on full time to be the Dem on staff. And it was one of those kind of opportunities that you don't even think twice. Just, of course, I would love to do this. I've been interested in this all my life, and to have this opportunity is something that it was just, I was over the moon. I was ecstatic.
All right, so this show is meant to be about political consultants, and I don't know if my viewers know what political consultants are. So you grabbed this great job that was in front of you, but what is it? What do you do?
Oh, there is no day that is similar to another one. It's great. It's a lot of fun if you like this kind of work. If you really look at politics in a way that you can see, one, it's an opportunity to do a lot of good, and two, it's an opportunity to really get your hands dirty and get in there and have an impact. It's a lot of fun, and it's one day I may be sitting down with the mayor talking about what my candidate can do to better have an impact on the city. The next day I might be making a radio buy or a TV buy, working with the media to make sure that a different campaign is going to get the media slots that they want. So there's a lot that goes into it. Right now there are two campaigns that are really taking up the most of my time, and they provide very different opportunities. One of them is a levy. It's a senior services levy in Hamilton County, which is where Cincinnati is in Ohio. And for them, I am the day-to-day campaign manager. So yesterday I was on the phone with Radio 1, which is a national radio opportunity, buying radio ad time in Cincinnati around the election. The other campaign is a young woman who is running for school board, and she has a college student who is her actual campaign manager, and I serve as the lead advisor. So when it comes to setting up opportunities for her to receive endorsements, when it comes to helping her really hone her policy ideas, it's one thing to come in with what you want to do differently. It's another thing to actually put that in a way that makes sense to voters. So helping her craft those ideas, and they're very different opportunities, but they're both a lot of fun, and I believe in both of those campaigns, or I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
So that's a good segue for my next question. Do you believe in those campaigns? When a client comes to you, a potential client, whether it's a candidate or an issue, how do you decide if you're going to take that on?
Well, it's tough. Being a bipartisan shop, we don't always agree on everything, and we agree on more things than we disagree. That is for sure. But I am the Dem on a staff that is two Republicans on the other side, and we're all more centrist than we are extremes, and that's why our company is called Mainstream, is that we work with the center. We refuse to work with, my boss likes to say, we work between the 20s. We won't work with, Tea Partyists, we won't work with, it used to be called occupiers, or whatever we're calling the extreme left now these days. We won't work with either side. We will work with the people who actually want to make a difference, are not bomb throwers, and actually want to have a seat at the table. And that has led to some intense discussions, and we have settled on candidates and campaigns that make sense for us as an office. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I don't get to work with some people that I really respect. And there have been opportunities where we have talked to people that if I was doing this independently, I probably wouldn't work with. But it's about the bipartisanship that's important to us.
How about strengths? What strengths are you looking for in a client? In other words, your job is to win, right? Because your next client's going to come in the door, and if you say, well, I just lost my last 3 races, they don't want to hear that, right? So you have to pick people that you think are going to win. What are you looking for in a win?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. That's it's a lot harder. Well, I'm sure it seems harder than it is. You'll get candidates who you think, wow, this one's dynamic, this one is going to win, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen. So it is tough. The number one indicator, and I can say this about a lot of industries, but it's definitely true in politics, it's hard work. There's something to be said about getting out there, and I'll say that right now I am incredibly impressed with the young woman who's running for school board that we're working with. Her name is Christine Fisher. She's a first-time candidate, and she is just everywhere. And other candidates see that, and they model their campaigns because she is at everything. And it really impresses us, and that's the number one thing we look for is, are you willing to put in the work? Because it's one thing, look, we're talking to a young man who's running for Congress, and he's a hard worker as well, but it'd be easy to just say, yeah, I'm running for Congress. It's pretty cool, right? I mean, it is a great opening line at a bar, but the problem is that's all you're going to be if you're not willing to put in the work. So we look at, are you willing to put in the work? Can we get paid? There are a lot of people who are idealists who want to run for something, and it's awesome. And I mean, we would love to work with them, but if they aren't willing to put in the time to do the fundraising, which is not fun, and I can say that from 5 years experience, it's not fun. But if they're not willing to put in the time to do that, then they're not going to raise the money they need to pay us, and it wouldn't be fair to us to take on a campaign in which they're going to spend all of their money paying the consultants. Because if they're not going to work the fundraise, and we've had to turn down some candidates for this reason, we're not cheap. We have a lot of experience in our office, and we come with a lot of tools. But if you aren't able to fundraise and all of your money is going to pay for us, you can't run an effective campaign, and that's not fair to the candidate. So we have said no to candidates who we aren't able to fundraise well enough, because it just wouldn't be fair to their campaign for them to pay us all we would demand.
So in the world of politics nowadays, you know, someone comes to you, obviously that's one of the first conversations you have to have. How much is this campaign going to cost, and how are we going to get there?
Yep.
Right? And those are hard conversations.
Yep.
Now, I assume the dream candidate may be able to self-fund, and who knows, but most can't.
Yeah.
And I'm also guessing that you don't want them to self-fund because you want them in the community. That's part of how you build a campaign.
Yep.
You're touching people, gives you a chance to tell your story, et cetera, et cetera. So having said all that, how much does the money get in the way of what you're doing with these candidates versus the campaign stuff?
That's a fantastic question. You know, we said earlier that there is no substitute for knocking on doors and talking to voters, which is 100% true. However, the first question, the first topic you talk about with every candidate is money, and for a lot of different reasons. There are some candidates who can self-fund, and we have not worked with any of those mostly because of what you said, is that those candidates, they come with their own ideas, which is great, and obviously we respect everybody's ideas on how a campaign should go. But if you're funding your campaign, you're calling your own shots, you don't really need us. You don't need us to be sitting on your shoulder telling you the right way to do things. You've got your own ideas on what you should be doing. Money impacts every avenue of politics. We have seen in this race for school board money that you wouldn't imagine. I mean, we're not talking years ago when, you could run a campaign on $1,000, $1,500. You buy the yard signs, you go out and knock on every door in the county, and you get elected to the school board. That's not the way it works anymore, unfortunately. You'll see some people who win that way, and in field races more so. We have a city council race going on in Cincinnati right now where there's currently 23 candidates on the ballot. And there's going to be one or two that don't spend a lot of money and actually make it on because they work hard, they're everywhere, and voters know their name. And when it comes down to 23 candidates, the difference between 9th place and 10th and off the ballot is going to be probably 500 to 1,000 votes. So that makes a difference. But the ones who really win and the ones who come in first, second, third are the ones that can spend a lot of money, and they've got the TV ads, they've got the radio ads, they're all over the internet now. They can afford to send out a bunch of mailers. I mean, that's what makes the difference.
You mentioned something I always thought was very important in a campaign, particularly when I was running a campaign. You spend a lot of time developing the strategy up front, and then after that, it's implementation. And once you hit the point where it's implementation, the candidate is only, from my perspective, and I think you just said, they're just there to do their job.
Yeah.
In other words, in the strategy, you're supposed to go out and do the ground game 3 days a week.
Yep.
You're supposed to make these calls 6 days a week. You don't want a candidate who's trying to be their own campaign manager.
That's right. That's right. We so the most fun time for a campaign is what we call the sprint, and that is starts on Monday, Labor Day, and runs through the election, because that's when you are doing something every day. There is no days off. You might have a night off, but during the day you are doing a Facebook live chat. You're dialing for dollars on your lunch break, something like that. So it's fun, but with our school board candidate, I spent about a week with her and her campaign manager, who's, like I said, is a young kid at Xavier.
Not an old gray beard like you.
No, not like me. I'm only 31, so I'm not that much older than her campaign manager. But he's 21.
He's a kid.
Yeah, he's a little bit younger. Okay. He's newer to this, but. We laid out, so we counted, there's 63 days between the start of the sprint and election day. We know what she is doing all but 8 days of that campaign. And those 8 days are so that we can pivot if needed. If, let's say, a month in, phone banking, for whatever reason, just isn't working for her, that's fine. We abandon phone banking and we add extra days for her to door knock. Maybe, God forbid, she breaks a foot, can't door knock. Well, then we add in extra days for phone banking. So it really is scripted. I mean, when you have 55 roughly out of 63 days scripted before the sprint even starts, it really takes a person who is willing to trust their team to get out there and do what they're supposed to be doing. And there is room for moving a little bit, but to win a race like that, there is a pattern that you follow. and you got to stick to it. A lot of it you just got to do. This is my favorite thing in Cincinnati, for whatever reason. A style of campaigning called honkin' waves always work. Are you familiar with this?
Honkin' waves, okay.
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways you do this. Either you get a group on a busy street corner, or an overpass on the highway. You put up your campaign sign, and you and a volunteer, the campaign manager, stand there during rush hour and you wave at traffic. That's it. That's all that goes into it, and it works. It works, and we can't explain why it works, but it works. So in Cincinnati, you do it. It's awkward. You always feel super weird standing on an overpass waving at cars for 2 hours, but it works. And at first, first-time candidates are, why am I doing this? Why am I on an overpass at rush hour? And then they see the result. They see the mentions on Facebook. They see the news, who will tweet out a picture of, the campaign standing on an overpass, and then they trust the process.
All right, so I want my viewers to all run for office. I want them to enjoy the sprint, and that's the amazing time here. But I want to back them up now, because how far out ideally do you want a candidate to come to you for office? In other words, you're working for a school board candidate, and she's going to run in November. Well, and let's say and most elections are in November, some are in the spring.
Yeah.
But do you want a candidate coming to you a year ahead of time, a year and a half? How far out should someone be thinking about, I want to run for office?
So it depends on the candidate, and it depends on the office. So for school board, she came to us in about March.
This year?
Of this year.
All right, so about 8 months out.
8 months. And she announced 6 months in advance. So we did all the behind-the-scenes work for about 2 months before she officially announced. And that's her lending the campaign money. That's making sure that, look, she is a young mother of 2, that's making sure that her husband is okay with taking care of the kids most of the days. That's making sure her job is okay with her missing time. Those are the things you do before you actually announce your candidacy.
Right.
And then
thanks for bringing all this up, because that's what I want the viewers to hear.
This is all very important, and I've talked to some people who have dropped out very early because their job isn't okay with them missing a day a week, or others who realize that they're probably gonna have to take 6 months off work and they can't afford to do so. So these are things you really need to look into beforehand. If you are lucky that you can afford this, if you have a partner who can float the family for that time, if you have a job that'll let you either go down to part-time or let you take some time off, great, then it's all okay. But that's not always the case. So that starts before the campaign is even.
Right, and you're saying you want 2 to 3 months minimum for that?
If I'm recommending to a candidate, I'm recommending that they give a couple of months of getting their affairs in order. Making sure that they have.
Sounds like they're getting ready to die. Get your affairs.
You know what? Campaigns are tough.
The doctor says, I got bad news for you. You better get your affairs in order.
Yes.
Same thing with a campaign.
That's
I got
exactly
bad news.
right.
You better get
That's
your affairs
exactly
in order.
right. Campaigns are tough. They take a lot of background work, and so it really does take a lot of that. I mean, I'm very lucky. I have a very supporting girlfriend who's here in the studio, and we've talked about what it would mean.
You're giving some good shout-outs today. I can
know
see
what
why
I'm
you're
doing.
a good politician.
That's right. But we've talked about what it would mean if I ever do decide to run instead of being on the behind-the-scenes work, and it's those are some serious conversations, and it really is not something to be shied away from, because you can't. You can't do it halfway. There is no half running. You're either in or you're out.
Right.
And the most embarrassing thing, and I've had some friends that have done this, is you get in and it very early on is clear that it's not going to work, and you get out. It's embarrassing, and I mean, it's not a long-lasting embarrassment, but it's an embarrassing thing. So have those conversations early with everyone in your life.
So I'm trying to back you in time. So you got 2 or 3 months of this thought process, this organization thing, getting your affairs in order.
Yes, that's right.
How much time are you allowing normally for a petition? Petition part of the campaign.
What a great question. So I can actually talk about this from recent experience. For the Democratic Party, they decided early on this year that they were going to announce their slate for school board and for city council about 6 months early. Unfortunately, one of the candidates for city council that was endorsed and one of the candidates for school board didn't get their petitions in time. So the school board candidate actually had to get signed affidavits because too many of her signatures were ruled invalid. And I can tell you that from personal experience, petitions can be ruled invalid for almost anything. If the signature doesn't exactly match the one that's on file, if you've moved and you forgot to update it, signatures will be ruled invalid. So for school board, you had to have 300 valid signatures. She turned in 400, which they'd recommend you turn in 200 more than you need. And she fell 17 short. She took signed affidavits of these individuals and ended up coming in at 401. I mean, talk about cutting it close. For city council, you have to turn in 500. They recommend 1,000, or some people even more. This candidate turned his in at almost the literal 11th hour. He turned it in an hour before the deadline, even though he had 6 months to do it. Luckily, he had enough, but in that situation, you're out of luck if they ruled him invalid. So, we recommend that the first 3 to 4 months of your campaign, that's how you announce yourself to voters. It's one thing to get your volunteers out there for you, getting signatures. It's another thing for you to go to community events. And we're very lucky in Cincinnati. We are a community city, so there is no shortage of church festivals, of lunches on what we call Fountain Square. It's the middle of the city. Go out there with your petition on your lunch hour and get 20 signatures, and there's 20 voters who know you're running. So we recommend that is the first leg of your campaign, is the petitions. So like I said, our school board candidate came to us in March, and she's on the ballot in November. She had plenty of time. She turned her signatures in July, had plenty of them, and it was all good. Her deadline was the first week of August, so she left plenty of time. And we also, here's another tip, you are allowed to go to your Board of Elections and check the signatures yourself. So if you're going through and the first 3 pages of your petition sheet, 10 of them are invalid, you better get back out there, because I guarantee you other ones are going to be invalid as well.
All right, well, you need time for your petitions, and you got to cut that close. And I need time for my show, and we already cut that close. We're out of time. So time flies when you're having fun.
It does. It really does.
I'm going to give your mother a good report.
Thank you.
She'll watch the show, and she'll have her own report. But I think we gave him enough plugs.
Yeah.
No? Thanks for being a great guest.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Well, it was a treat to have Jay Shifman with us today. And Julie, if you're watching, I hope you enjoyed the show. Your son did a great job. But we had this show because, again, I want you to think about running for office. I want the viewers to think about running for office. Obviously, I'm pushing independent candidates. But quite frankly, if you want to run as a Democrat or Republican, I just think we need more candidates. We need more people who are trying to push the message and change the system. So that's what this show's about. And hopefully it will be what you're about when you think about running for office. Jay gave us some great thoughts today. You want to have enough lead time. Clearly want to have enough money. We don't like the money in politics, but it's a reality. And for those of you that are thinking to run for office, I think it behooves you to have conversations with people like Jay and decide if you want to have a consultant. It's a rough game. It's a tough game. And as he just explained, it's an around-the-clock game. And you've got to have great support, and you have to put a lot of thought into it. So think about running for office, and we hope you learn a lot today in terms of the conversation about the role of the consultants and where they can take you. Remember, if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. Thank you.